So, welcome Emma, it's lovely to have you today. Do tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, my name's Emma Falkner. I'm a leadership consultant and I've been running my business now for 20 years.
Okay, so we're going to talk today about some of the work you do with teams. So tell us, what are some of the things that are going wrong in teams these days?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot is going wrong in teams, especially in the public sector. Within the realm of austerity, people are worried about their jobs, they're worried about their future, they're worried about the fact that on the horizon, they can't see any security, and this is having a profound effect on their daily interactions, not only with their service users, but with one another.
Okay, so the stress is starting from the individual, but it's affecting the teams they're working within. Okay, so how is that taking effect? What are the interactions that are going wrong, or what kind of problems are you finding?
Yes, so often the interactions that are going wrong are very difficult to see.
Okay.
Because on the service, you might look at these team members and you'll talk to their managers, and their managers will say, oh, so-and-so, oh, they're fantastic with a service user. You couldn't get a better practitioner, but boy, oh boy, when that person's interacting with the team, it's hideous.
Okay.
People start to shout at one another, people start to gossip, interaction breaks down because people start developing mistrust of one another. And worst case scenario, you'll get a team of individuals working in complete opposition to one another.
Okay. So what is that doing for the organisation?
So as you can imagine, the organisation is not benefiting from that type of behaviour.
Right.
The team itself can become a pariah, it can become labelled, and worst case scenario, it can be cut.
Okay. So that's outlining the problem. Now, you do a lot of different interventions, but the one we're particularly going to talk about today is action learning. Tell us what that is.
In a nutshell, action learning is a group of 5 to 8 people who sit around a table with a trained facilitator, resolving significant problems that relate to themselves and their work. What makes it different to any other problem-solving forum is that there has to be action.
Okay.
It's not a talking shop.
Okay.
And there has to be learning. So the group is always asking themselves questions like, how are we doing? How are we relating to one another? How can we improve the way we are resolving these problems?
Okay.
What is the elephant in the room here?
Yeah.
So they get to take action and learn about the way they're doing that. Okay.
And is it quite prescriptive how you do that, or is it just about working to a set of rules and then open up to whatever comes forward?
There is a very strict set of rules which protects the group, really. And this set of rules is about encouraging respect, trust and openness.
Okay.
So I would say that once those rules are in place and everyone understands them, then anything is possible. People can talk about anything, really, then.
Okay. And so as a facilitator, how do you handle the fact that there are going to be some very strong characters, some quiet people, and that it doesn't get dominated by the usual suspects?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, well, one of the beauty, I suppose one of the most important things about action learning is the concept of equity. Okay. Everybody is equal. No one person is more important than another.
Okay.
And therefore, equity is apparent in everything in action learning. So you don't speak more than another person. You listen equally to everybody. Everybody has a chance to present an issue or a problem.
Yeah.
And that way no one ever dominates and no one ever feels dominated. But in order to keep that on track, that principle of equity, you do need a facilitator.
Okay. So how do issues actually get resolved? I mean, just by bringing things out into the open, in this equitable and respectful way, is that enough?
Issues get resolved because people have to ask themselves questions.
Okay.
Okay, so you present an issue, people will ask you questions which are free from advice, so essentially you're going to have to ask yourself sometimes some very uncomfortable questions.
Sure.
So, and one of the basic ground rules of action learning is there has to be an action. So you ask yourself some questions to the point where you come up with some kind of solution and then you take an action.
Make that concrete for us.
So for example, it could be, I might come to an action learning set and say, you know, I've got this really, really difficult member of staff who is performing really, really well with their service user, but is chaotic within the team. Mm. So the group will ask that person some questions.
Okay.
And the questions might be something like, why is this important to you now? What's stopping you? What stopped you from taking action up till now?
Mm-hmm.
What options have you got? If this carries on, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the group will also say, have we missed any other questions? What other questions haven't we asked you? And that's often the golden nugget time. So the individual will say, well, you haven't actually asked me. The question is, why I haven't dealt with this person might be because I'm frightened of this person, or I don't like conflict, or so the questions that the individual often asks themselves are the most pertinent.
Yes.
But at the end of that little spate of questions and answers, that individual still needs to come up with some action. They will have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
So I think action learning really helps people who are experiencing high levels of stress. And that's because it's a very unusual experience for people to get together with their so-called enemies around a table and listen to a point where they start to become empathetic and understanding of one another's problems and issues.
Okay, so this is a forum for the team to get together and be open with each other about what's going on.
Yeah. And you might ask yourself, the question is, why on earth would people who otherwise are in conflict start being open with one another? And that's the kind of magic of action learning.
Right.
The ground rules are about confidentiality. It's about not speaking over one another. It's about listening, actively listening. It's about not giving advice, not giving your own opinion, not giving your point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a nutshell, it's really about being heard and being mindful of one another's position.
Okay. Because I would guess that quite a lot of people would be nervous about what could come out, and that actually they might be worried that more conflict would arise from being honest about what's going on.
Yes, well that is a very valid concern, because if you don't know how to run an action learning set or facilitate a set, that could very well happen. Mm-hmm. So I always advise people to have a briefing, an action learning briefing, so that when you're coming into the set, you know what to expect.
Okay.
And you're up for change. You want to change.
Yeah.
You're up to listen to your colleagues.
Yeah.
And therefore you're putting in a set of foundations that are very strong in relation to your safety of speaking openly.
Okay, great. Can we make this a bit more concrete? Obviously, without naming clients, can you give us some examples of some of the organisations you're working with, some of the things that are going wrong, and some of the ways that the action learning has helped?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm working with a prison.
Okay.
A couple of prisons actually, and the problems we're dealing at the moment with are high levels of volatility obviously in the prison environment.
Right.
So high levels of violence and abuse, and how this experience is affecting the teams that I'm working with.
Okay.
So the team itself is doing very well with the prison staff and inmates they're working with.
Yeah.
They're not doing very well at working with one another.
Okay. Okay.
So they're taking all their stress out on one another.
Okay.
So where action learning has helped is it's given them a space to stick their heads above the parapet and talk to one another in a way which is protected by time. It's in a venue away from the prison, and it's with a person who has who's completely objective.
Okay.
So I don't work in the prison. I have no agenda. It's easier to speak to someone outside your service than it is to speak to someone within.
Okay. Okay. So tell me, how's that actually working? What's actually coming out of that work you're doing with the prison?
I think for the first time they've really started listening to one another.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, they've started understanding one another's values more. They've started understanding how on some days an individual will work well and on other days they won't. But the most important thing, I think, is that they just get to be together in a very different way than they are on a day-to-day. They never have time ever to sit down.
Yeah.
So for one morning a month, they can sit down and talk about their work in a very different way.
Okay.
And that has had a significant effect on them. And lots of other people have noticed how changed this team is from just spending that time in the action.
Do you want to give us another example?
So, I'm also working in the social care sector with people who are caring for older residents in homes, and their stress level has been very much about managing people, managing the difficult members of staff. And so their stress levels was very much linked to, I can't change this person, they're still misbehaving, they're still not following the rules, they're still in conflict with other people. So what they found in the action learning set is that they were able to identify what's in their influence to manage this person and what's outside their influence.
Okay.
And once they understand what they can influence, what they can't influence, there's a much greater sense of freedom, and they find their stress levels will drop.
Okay, so if you wanted to set up an action learning set in your own organisation, what would you do? I mean, could you actually find out how to do this from a book, from looking at stuff on the internet, or what's the best way forward?
Well, you can read a book and look it up on the internet and go into your organisation and say, hey, let's try this action learning thing. But that would be highly risky.
Okay.
Because as you probably gathered, there's a lot more to it than someone going through a sort of procedure.
Yeah.
So I would always advise you to send off some of your, I suppose, your high-achieving staff or enthusiastic members of staff. Send them off to an organisation who trains people to become action learning facilitators. Or alternatively, bring someone in like myself to facilitate a group and then train that group to become self-sufficient in action learning.
So in terms of investment for an organisation, do you think that's an efficient way forward? Because if somebody's been trained, then presumably the group can get on with it by themselves?
Yeah, I think that's the most cost-effective way, is to actually, if you introduce someone into the organisation who is a trained facilitator and also allow that person to train the group, then their job is done, the group is trained, they can carry on self-facilitating, and no more investment really is needed. Yeah.
And how long does it actually typically take for an action learning group to start seeing effects?
I would say that this is remarkable, about 3 or 4 sessions.
Okay.
So you can move from a highly stressed group of individuals to a group of individuals that acknowledge they have stress, but they can also acknowledge that they have control over it. And you can do that literally in 3 sessions.
Great. I know that you've been involved with this kind of work for a long time. Why do you feel that action learning is one of your favourite tools now?
Because I think there's something remarkable about sitting in an action learning group with a set of individuals, say 6 individuals, and really being heard. It's very powerful being heard by one other person, like in a coaching scenario, but being heard by 6 of your peers or your colleagues or people like yourself, being really heard by those is a very powerful experience. And also the accountability within that group. So when you say you're going to do something, when you're going to take action over something that's causing you stress, 6 other people are bearing witness to that. So you won't go back to that group the following month or the following week and say, oh, that action, I didn't really get around to that.
Yeah.
You won't do that.
Yeah.
Because the accountability is high. The expectations are high. So I think, therefore, I see greater results emerging from an action learning set than I do, say, a series of team facilitated events or sessions.
Terrific.
So, Emma, I'd just say thank you very much for telling us about action learning. It's been really interesting, and if people want to get in touch with you and find out a bit more, they can do that from the website.
Great, my pleasure.